Happy New Year. I'm hoping that 2023 is filled with blessings from God for all of you. Today we're beginning a new series of lessons, short series, basically I think pretty much the month of January. We'll be going through a series on the book of Haggai. On Wednesday night, we've been going through a chronological study of the Old Testament, and we are nearing the end of it. And we just went through the book of Haggai, which is one of those minor prophets. Not minor because it's unimportant, as we're going to see in the month of January from our sermon series, but minor because it's small compared to the larger books of prophecy like Isaiah and Jeremiah. So anyway, we're going to be looking at this book of Haggai with a sermon series entitled Rebuilding the House of God. And so we'll have these sermons from Haggai to help us to see the importance of rebuilding God's house. And I think that's especially true for this congregation, but I believe for many congregations of the Lord's church throughout the world, that we need to take to heart the message of Haggai, because I think we have become complacent like the people in Haggai's day. So at this point, we're going to start in Haggai chapter 1, verses 5 through 7. Haggai chapter 1, verses 5 through 7. And here we are told, what's the situation? Just a little history. In fact, we're going to go ahead and do the history in just a few minutes. So I want to jump right into this. And as I mentioned, it's about rebuilding the house of God. And so we're going to read, first of all, verse 6. Haggai 1 and verse 6. Haggai 1, verse 6. It says, "You have sown much and bring in little. You eat, but do not have enough. You drink, but you are not filled with drink. You clothe yourselves, but no one is warm. And he who earns wages to put into a bag with holes." Think of that, the imagery here. You know, you're eating, but you're not getting filled up. You never get enough. You're planting. That's what sowing means, and you're not getting a return in your garden or your fields. You're drinking, but not. It's not satisfying or quenching your thirst. You're clothing yourselves, but it's not keeping you protected and warm. And he says, and I like that last phrase, he says you're earning wages, but it's like you're putting it into a coin purse, a bag, a bank account with holes in it. A bag with holes. Does your life seem to be like a bag with holes? You keep putting stuff in, and it just seems to disappear. You keep striving. What is slipping through the holes in your bag? Maybe it's money, success. How about your time? I don't know about you. Sometimes it seems like I blink, and not just hours, but days and months go by. What about pleasure, happiness, things? And that list could go on and on. What are you shoving into your bag? What are you trying to accumulate? And it just doesn't seem to happen. You're putting it in, but you're not accumulating. You want to know the reason? Well, I think it's important as we look. I mentioned we're going to look at Haggai chapter 1, verses 5 through 7. We looked at verse 6, and that's the problem. But you know what? That's sandwiched with verses 5 and 7. And verse 5 and 7 are almost exactly identical. In fact, most of it is, other than a difference in the introduction in verse 5. So Haggai chapter 1, verses 5 and 7. Same thing. Thus says the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. Consider your ways. This is what God's saying. Look at your life. Look at your situation. Look at your life that is a bag with holes. And consider why it is that way. Consider your ways. So that's what I'm going to be encouraging you. And what perfect time to do that on the first day of this new year, when we sit down to look back at the past and we look ahead to the future. How many of us make resolutions? How many of us make plans and we're going to do things differently? We're going to get rid of some bad habits. We're going to create some new habits. What a perfect way or a perfect time, as Haggai encourages us from the Lord, consider your ways. So, I told you I'd get into the history to understand what Haggai was dealing with, or the people of his day were dealing with. So 586 BC, God's temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. So 586, that is in their recent history. We're talking, about 66 years prior to the time of Haggai. So it's recent history. The temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. In 538 BC, this was after the Babylonians had carried the people away into captivity, left a remnant in Jerusalem, which is in ruins. The temple is destroyed. In 538, Cyrus, king of Persia, decrees the return of the Jews to Jerusalem and rebuilding of God's temple. So now there's been this decree by this Persian king. The Persians defeated or conquered the Babylonians. The Persians and their association, their allies, the Medes are in control. And so Cyrus makes this decree to send the Jews back, and they are told to rebuild their temple. So that's in 538. In 536, it takes 2 years for the people to get back, to get settled in. And in 536, the foundation of God's temple is laid. So that's where we're now. This is the time, the period when Haggai comes onto the scene, approximately 520 BC. And here's the situation. The temple foundation was laid in 536. So we're talking approximately 16 years later. God's temple is still unfinished and no work is being done. So that's the situation. That's the circumstances that Haggai comes with his message from God. So what is the message? What is the message that Haggai has for the people? It's found at the beginning of the book of Haggai. Haggai chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. This is what the Lord Almighty says. These people say, the time has not yet come for the Lord's house to be built. Then the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your paneled houses while this house remains a ruin? God said, you've been working on this for 16 years and you're saying it's not time to get this done. It's not time to build the house of God right now. And so God comes back with Haggai's question for them. God sends a question through Haggai. So is it time for you to be living in your homes, your nice homes, your paneled homes, your luxurious homes, while my house remains in ruins? That's important for them to consider. They're busy building their homes and fixing them up and building their businesses and planting their crops and taking care of themselves and what they want. But they're not focused on the Lord's house. They're not working on his temple. And so in Haggai chapter 1, verse 9, so this is following what we looked at in our introduction about the bag with holes. In Haggai 1:9, it says, "You expected much, but see it turned out to be little. What you brought home, I blew away. Why, declares the Lord Almighty? Why is their life like a bag with holes? Why are they expecting much but getting little? Why is what they're bringing home being blown away by the Lord? Because it says, of my house, which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with his own house." Do you know what that's telling us? It's telling us, I want you to consider this. Is God telling us that we shouldn't have houses? So is that what the message is? So we shouldn't have houses? You see, the problem was not the houses. Their problem was their priorities. Their problem was what they put as their priority. It's not wrong to have a house. It's not wrong to have a business. But it's wrong to put that before the Lord. It's wrong to put that before doing his work. And that's what they were doing. So again, their problem was not houses. Their problem was priorities. And so that's what they're being told to consider. And that's what I'm encouraging you to consider this morning. In fact, the title of this lesson is Consider Your Priorities. Consider your priorities. See, they had, and here's our first point, they had the wrong priority. And what was that? Building my house. The wrong priority. If we put that first, building my house, and by that, that's anything about my life. You know, if the focus on what I need, what I want, my family, my business, my home, my yard, all of that, if that's the priority, if that's the focus, it's the wrong priority. So what? What do we need to do if that's the case? We need to ask ourselves, if we're going to consider our priorities, ask ourselves, what am I busy doing? What are you busy doing? You know, we're all busy. You know, every single one of us has 168 hours in our week. And I guarantee that this past week, you filled all 168 hours with something. And that's the case with every week that you lived in 2022 and every week that you've lived up to this point. We fill our weeks with what we put as our priority. So consider, what are you investing your time in? What are you investing your time in? What are you spending your money on? How are you using your energy? What is your primary mental focus? These are things that are going to tell you what's your priority. I believe that too often our priority is our own houses, our own lives, and not what it should be. There's a song, it's been from a few years back, by the group Mercy Me, entitled it's entitled In the Blink of an Eye. And listen to one of the lines in the song. The lyrics go like this: "Sometimes I feel disappointed by the way I spend my time. How can I further your kingdom when I'm so wrapped up in mine?" That's what we need to do if we're going to consider our priorities. We need to ask those same questions. How am I spending my time? How can I further God's kingdom when I'm so wrapped up in mine? Go back to Haggai chapter 1 again, this time verse 8. This is what God commands him to do. This is what God says you need to get going on. You know, he says, you've been working on your homes. You've been living your lives. You've been building your businesses, planting your crops, taking care of your orchards, your livestock. This is what you need to do. Haggai 1 verse 8, it says, "Go up to the hill country and bring lumber and rebuild my house. And I will take pleasure in it, and I will be glorified, says the Lord, by accepting it as done for my glory and by displaying my glory in it." God says, here's the answer. If you want to get it right, if you want to get the right priority, right now, go up in the hill country. Go up, gather some lumber, cut some lumber, bring it back down, and get to work on this building, this house that you're building for me, that you've been working on for 16 years, and now you're not doing anything, and it's just sitting there half finished. And you know what? What happens to a half-finished building? It starts to deteriorate. It starts to fall apart. It doesn't accomplish what it's meant to do. I think there's a lesson here for us. And you say, how is that? We've got a nice church building here. Might needs a little bit of work. God's not talking about a building here. Because go to 1 Corinthians 3 and verse 16. I want you to get this. Back then they were working on the house of God, the temple of God. 1 Corinthians 3 and verse 16 tells us, Paul's writing to the church in Corinth, don't you realize that all of you together, all of you Christians together are the house of God, and that the Spirit of God lives among you in his house? I want you to understand. Paul wanted the Corinthian church, the Christians there, to understand, and I want you at the Park Rapids Church and those that are listening, that the church is the house of God today. And so when God is telling us to be rebuilding, to be building the house of God, he's talking about his church. He's not talking about a building. He's talking about a group of people. And we need to be built up spiritually, but we need to be built up in number as we go out and share the good news of Jesus. We need to be reaching out to our families, to our friends, our neighbors, the people we're going to meet this week who need to hear the message of Jesus Christ. We need to be busy building the house of God. So, what's the right priority? The right priority is not building my house. The right priority is building God's house. So, the question, again, if we're considering our priorities, the question, what are you doing to build the house of God? I want you to seriously consider that. I want you to pray about that. I want you to look and keep track this week. What you do this week. Think about what you did last week. Think about what you did in 2022. What are you doing to build the house of God? We need to get busy on the priority, the number one priority. And you say, what is the number one priority? Matthew chapter 6, verse 33. Matthew 6, verse 33. It says, but more than anything else. Now, would you say that's a priority? More than anything else, put God's work first and do what he wants. Then the other things will be yours as well. Don't worry about your homes. Don't worry about your clothes or what you're going to eat or paying your bills or your family and all of those things. They're important. But number one, he says, more than anything else, write that down, more than anything else, put God's work first and do what he wants. And the rest will be taken care of. He'll make sure that the rest is falling into place. When we get the cart before the horse, when we start focusing on ourselves, then we will neglect God's work and we will suffer as a result. But when we put him first, God will bless us and take care of those needs we have. So, as we wrap it up, are your priorities right? In 2023, God is calling all of us to get to work rebuilding the house of God. Let's get our priorities right. God bless you and have a wonderful week. And have a wonderful 2023.